left in them. Among various kinds of torture invented by him, one was to induce people to drink a large quantity of wine, and then to tie up their members with harpstrings, thus tormenting them at once by the tightness of the ligature and the stoppage of their urine. Had not death prevented him, and Thrasyllus designedly, as some say, prevailed with him to defer some of his cruelties, in hopes of longer life, it's believed that he would have destroyed many more, and not have spared even the rest of his grandchildren, for he was jealous of Caius, and hated Tiberius, as having been conceived in adultery. This conjecture is indeed highly probable, for he used often to say, "Happy Priam, who survived all his children." Amidst these enormities, in how much fear and apprehension, as well as odium and detestation he lived, is evident from many indications. He forbade the soothsayers to be consulted in private, and without some witnesses being present. He attempted to suppress the oracles in the neighborhood of the city, but being terrified by the divine authority of the Praenestine lots, he abandoned the design. For though they were sealed up in a box and carried to home, yet they were not to be found in it until it was returned to the temple. More than one person of consular rank appointed governors of provinces; he never ventured to dismiss to their respective destinations, but kept them until several years after, when he nominated their successors, while they still remained present with him. In the meantime they bore the title of their office, and he frequently gave them orders which they took care to have executed by their deputies and assistants. He never removed his daughter-in-law or grandsons after their condemnation to any place but in fetters and in a covered litter, with a guard to hinder all who met them on the road and travellers from stopping to gaze at them. After Sejanus had plotted against him, though he saw that this birthday was solemnly kept by the public, and divine honours paid to golden images of him in every quarter, yet it was with difficulty at last, and more by artifice than his imperial power, that he accomplished his death. In the first place, to remove him from about his person, under the pretext of doing him honour, he made him his colleague in his fifth consulship, which, although then absent from the city, he took upon him for that purpose, long after his preceding consulship. Then having flattered him with the hope of an alliance by marriage with one of his own kindred, and the prospect of the tribunitian authority, he suddenly, while Sejanus little expected it, charged him with treason, in an abject and pitiful address to the senate, in which, among other things, he begged them to send one of the consuls to conduct himself, a poor solitary old man, with a guard of soldiers, into their presence. Still distrustful, however, and apprehensive of an insurrection, he ordered his grandson Drusus, whom he still kept in confinement at Rome, to be set at liberty, and if occasion required to head the troops. He had likewise ships in readiness to transport him to any of the legions to which he might consider it expedient to make his escape. Meanwhile he was upon the watch, from the summit of the lofty cliff, for the signals which he had ordered to be made, if anything occurred, lest the messenger should be tardy. Even when he had quite foiled the conspiracy of Sejanus, he was still haunted as much as ever with fears and apprehensions, insomuch that he never once stirred out of the Villa Jovis for 9 months after. To the extreme anxiety of mind which he now experienced, he had the mortification to find superadded the most poignant reproaches from all quarters. Those who were condemned to die heaped upon him the most opprobrious language in his presence, or by handbills scattered in the senator seats in the theatre. These produced different effects. Sometimes he wished, out of shame, to have all smothered and concealed; at other times he would disregard what was said, and publish it himself. To this accumulation of scandal and open sarcasm, there is to be subjoined a letter from Artabanus, king of the Parthians, in which he upbraids him with his parricides, murders, cowardice, and lewdness, and advises him to satisfy the furious rage of his own people, which he had so justly excited, by putting an end to his life without delay. At last, being quite weary of himself, he acknowledged his extreme misery in a letter to the senate, which began thus: "What to write to you, conscript fathers, or how to write, or what not to write at this time, may all the gods and goddesses pour upon my head a more terrible vengeance than that under which I feel myself daily sinking, if I can tell. Some are of opinion that he had a foreknowledge of those things, from his skill in the science of divination, and perceived long before what misery and infamy would at last come upon him, and that for this reason, at the beginning of his reign, he had absolutely refused the title of the father of his country, and the proposal of the senate to swear to his acts, lest he should afterwards, to his greater shame, be found unequal to such extraordinary honors. This indeed may be justly inferred from the speeches which he made upon both those occasions, as when he says, 'I shall ever be the same, and shall never change my conduct, so long as I retain my senses; but to avoid giving a bad precedent to posterity, the senate ought to beware of binding themselves to the acts of any person whatever, who might by some accident or other be induced to alter them.' And again, 'If you should at any time entertain a jealousy of my conduct, and my entire affection for you, which heaven prevent by putting a period to my days, rather than I should live to see such an alteration in your opinion of me, the title of father will add no honor to me, but be a reproach to you, for your rashness in conferring it upon me, or inconstancy in altering your opinion of me.' In person he was large and robust, of a stature somewhat above the common size, broad in the shoulders and chest, and proportionable in the rest of his frame. He used his left hand more readily and with more force than his right, and his joints were so strong that he could bore a fresh, sound apple through with his finger, and wound the head of a boy or even a young man with a fillip. He was of a fair complexion, and wore his hair so long behind that it covered his neck, which was observed to be a mark of distinction affected by the family. He had a handsome face, but it was often full of pimples. His eyes, which were large, had a wonderful faculty of seeing in the night time and in the dark, for a short time only, and immediately after awaking from sleep, but they soon grew dim again. He walked with his neck stiff and upright, generally with a frowning countenance, being for the most part silent. When he spoke to those about him, it was very slowly, and usually accompanied with a slight gesticulation of his fingers. All which, being repulsive habits and signs of arrogance, were remarked by Augustus, who often endeavored to excuse them to the senate and people, declaring that they were natural defects which proceeded from no viciousness of mind. He enjoyed a good state of health, without interruption, almost during the whole period of his rule, though, from the 30th year of his age, he treated it himself according to his own discretion without any medical assistance. In regard to the gods and matters of religion, he discovered much indifference, being greatly addicted to astrology, and fully persuaded that all things were governed by fate. Yet he was extremely afraid of lightning, and when the sky was in a disturbed state, always wore a laurel crown on his head, because it is supposed that the leaf of that tree is never touched by the lightning. He applied himself with great diligence to the liberal arts, both Greek and Latin. In his Latin style he affected to imitate Messala Corvinus, a venerable man, to whom he had paid much respect in his own early years. But he rendered his style obscure by excessive affectation and abstruseness, so that he was thought to speak better extempore than in a premeditated discourse. He composed likewise a lyric ode, under the title of a lamentation upon the death of Lucius Caesar, and also some Greek poems in imitation of Euphorion, Rhianus, and Parthenius. These poets he greatly admired, and placed their works and statues in the public libraries, amongst the eminent authors of antiquity. On this account most of the learned men of the time vied with each other in publishing observations upon them, which they addressed to him. His principal study, however, was the history of the fabulous ages, inquiring even into its trifling details in a ridiculous manner, for he used to try the grammarians,